Hello everyone and welcome to my wonderful little workshop. Today showing you how I made these big 90 centimeter round shields from how's it called in English, like those glued together sheets of wood. I have to look it up, but very easy to make. You can do it yourself, and if you want to know how to make them, follow along this video and I will show you all the steps needed to get one of these yourself.
We will start off with a piece of 8mm plywood. I'm using poplar because poplar is very well suited to terms like building scabbards, building shields especially. And I'm finding the center by marking the two diagonals with a ruler. Now that I've found the center, I'm taking a piece of string with a nail on the end. In this case, it's even just a piece of duct tape folded over onto itself. And I'm driving the nail into the center I just marked out. Now I'm using a second nail to score a line or score a circle to mark out the size of the hole for the boss. You could of course also use a piece of string, or if you have a compass that big, you could also use that. But this method works quite well for me, and it also helps the wood to splinter less when I cut it with a reciprocating saw later on. And I repeat this process for the outside circle. And now that all my lines are laid out, I don't need the nail in the center any longer, and I can remove it. To prepare for me cutting out the hole in the center with a reciprocating saw, I drilled two 12mm holes. This just allows me to insert the blade of the reciprocating saw. Supposedly my saw can do plunge cuts, but I've never tried it, and to be honest, it's just a lot easier to pre-drill the two holes and be safe that way. Now that I'm cutting this piece of plywood with a reciprocating saw, it's probably a good moment to take a swerve out to protecting yourself. You already might be able to see that I'm wearing a respirator. I'm always wearing headphones when I'm working with power tools. And pretty much always when I'm in the shop I wear protective glasses. I already feel a bit naked without them, to be honest. But you only have that one pair of eyes, you only have that one pair of ears, and you only have these lungs. Bet you can replace a lung, but it's no fun. So protect yourself and be safe in the shop. Meanwhile, I've already cut out the centerpiece and now proceed to cut out the outermost circle of the shield. And now that everything is cut out by the magic of editing, you can take a file and deburr all the sharp edges the saw threw up. First on the inside and then on the outside. Of course, do both sides. Now we're getting to a part that I, as a mechanical engineer by trade, find very, very interesting. You see me measure the fabric lining for the shield here, which is linen. But what makes this so interesting for me is that we today use high-tech carbon fiber composite materials for building cars and stuff, but they knew how this concept of fiber reinforcement worked back then. And this fascinates me. A concept we use to build high-tech stuff today was used to build shields, or military tech, you should say, in the Middle Ages. And before gluing this on, I make sure the surface it's mating to is very, very clean and free of sawdust. And just like today, a lot of glue is used to get this composite material to stay together. And every time you glue something, it's good practice to pour over the amount you want to use into a separate container. Now here it serves a second practice because I'm thinning down this wood glue I'm using. This just helps me to spread it a bit more evenly onto the shield. Now I'm fully aware this is not what they would have used back then. They would probably have used some sort of hide glue or bone glue. But I have the option to use a modern glue that's waterproof when dry. This is water-soluble glue that is completely waterproof when it's dry. And having this option really is better for a modern product that I want to sell. While I have been on this side strafe, Patrick from the past is already starting to coat the shield evenly with a layer of this thinned down wood glue. And it's not a really thin glue, it's not watery, it still has some thickness to it, but it's a lot easier to spread that way, and especially this wood, it soaks up the moisture of the glue so fast. I would be barely fast enough to get the lining on there before it dries up. Now I'm looking for areas where I might have forgotten to put glue, or where it's already dry or too little glue, and just go over these areas once more. And once I'm happy with the spread of the glue, it means work as fast as possible and get the lining down there with as little wrinkles as possible. And I'm just using my hands to iron down the lining onto the glue and get it to stick real nice. And I've spotted a speck of dirt there, so I'm pulling back the lining, getting this piece of dirt out there, and getting the lining to stick down again. Just creates an uneven bump onto the surface of the lining, and it just doesn't look nice. Finally, really impregnating the lining with the glue, really put on there a thick coat of the thinned down glue. Really get it to seep in there, and then afterwards it's up for drying. Takes about 4 hours, 5 hours for me. I just leave it there overnight. The next day I'll start by trimming the excess material around the perimeter of the shield, just following the rim of the shield with a knife edge and just cutting out the lining. What's left there can still be used for smaller shields, like bucklers for instance, so this won't be thrown away. I'll keep this for further shield building projects. And since you somehow need to grip the shield, I cut out the centerpiece on one side. On the other side, however, I cut in what you might call gussets. These gussets can be folded through the shield hole onto the other side and will be glued there, leaving the shield hole with a lining of cloth, which, as you can imagine, is a lot nicer to your hand as having bare wood there. I just cut it into eighths. You could, however, cut it a lot finer than that if you felt like it, I suppose. I then flip the shield around again, pull the gussets through the hole and trim them off on the other side, so they don't show when I put on the shield boss. And after having successfully trimmed all the gussets, I used the same wood glue I used for gluing on the lining, and just fold them over and glue them in place. Using a glue that is water soluble is particularly helpful here because, as you can imagine, I always have glue on my fingers, and that way I can just go over to the sink, wash my hands, no glue will be left. Now while that dries, I can use my compass to draw a line around the outside. This is used for marking out the hole locations for later sewing on the rawhide rim. Now I'm not sure how far that goes for historical accuracy. I don't know of any findings with a rawhide rim around the outside, but bear in mind you are talking here of people that know how to use composite materials to enforce their military tech, so I'm pretty sure they would have some sort of protection around the shield edge, and using rawhide just seems reasonable to me. And coming to reenactment, where the shields get battered quite badly without rawhide, it's quite sensible to put a rim of rawhide around the outside. I'm just riding the rim of the plywood with the needle of my compass and trace a line on the top side of the lining. Once I have my line around the outside, I set my compass to 31 and a bit millimeters, which is pretty close to pi. And since my diameter is all integer, that means my last hole will drop in place with the first hole. Now I just walk around the perimeter of the shield and tick all my hole locations. I found it helps a lot placing the needle of the compass on my index finger and guiding it into position that way. And that way I can walk around the shield fairly quickly. Once my hole locations are marked out, it's up for drilling. Quite a tedious task, as pretty much everything when sewing rawhide around the rim. There are, of course, easy ways to attach rawhide to your shield, using nails for example, but sewing the rawhide always seemed to me as the most secure way and with no doubt the most tidy way to do it. Regarding hole size, you should of course choose your hole diameter a bit bigger than the biggest awl you wanted to use later on. Depending on the size of the shield, this takes me around 10 to 15 minutes. And after that's done, we change locations for sewing the rawhide. Rawhide, when it's dry, is quite hard and stiff and not easy to work with. It reminds me a bit of plastics, to be honest. To get it into a workable condition, you need to wet it first. I soaked this about 2 hours, I guess. And it needs to keep wet while you sew it around the outside rim of your shield. So it's a lot easier doing shields in winter when it's cold and wet than in summer when it's hot and dry. The first stitches are always the hardest ones, when the rawhide is flopping around and it's still soaking wet and dripping everywhere. I use a clamp to temporarily fix it in place before I put the thread through first holes. As a stitching, I use normal saddle stitching with 2 needles, making a knot on the inside of every stitch, which makes sure if the thread ripped for whatever reason, it will not continue to ripple but stay put pretty much. I'm now advancing the clamp to get in the second and third stitch, and after the second and third stitch are in, we'll stretch out the rawhide around the rim and secure it with an awl on the back side. And it can be sometimes very difficult to get the needle through the wetted rawhide. It has a tendency to really clamp down on your tools for some reason whatsoever. All in all, however, I very much enjoy sewing the rawhide around the rim. It's a somewhat meditative activity, deeply satisfying for me for some reason. Maybe it's because you can see the progress of your work so very clearly. Now, change perspectives for a second. This is a bit more progressed state of work, but it's just to show you how I make the knot on the back side. And I just poke the needle through, and then the loop that's hanging out from the counter thread, I just wrap it around 2 times. Now that the third stitch is in place, I'll start stretching out the rawhide around the rim. To start off, I just place it on there loosely until I reach the end of my rawhide. Once I reach the end, I start pulling on the rawhide as hard as I can to stretch it to the next hole I can get to. And there is two reasons for that. First, it helps when sewing the rawhide when it's firmly attached to the rim by this tension that creates. And second, it starts to bow in the rawhide around the edges so it doesn't throw as many ripples. Once I'm happy with the amount of stretch I got into the rawhide, I temporarily fix it in place with a second awl that I just poke through the rawhide and through the pre-drilled hole on the shield rim. And you can already see how this tension in the rawhide starts to pulling the edges around the shield rim. Now remember to put something on the tip of the awl to protect yourself from being poked during stitching. This awl will stay in place until I reach the end of this rawhide. And now from this perspective you can see it even clearer how the tension in the rawhide starts to pull it around the rim of the shield. From here it's just sewing it normally until you reach the end of this rawhide strip. After that you just set on a new strip and continue until you covered the whole perimeter of the shield. Once that's done, I leave it to dry overnight. Takes about 8 hours to dry and is sometimes even a bit wet in the morning still. But now that it's done, we can change locations again and go to the shop for mounting the shield boss and the strap band. I start off by aligning the shield boss on the upper side of the shield, and I feel with my fingers on the underside if the boss is centered relative to the grip hole. Once I'm happy with the alignment, I take a drill and poke through the 4 holes. Now be aware that on most bosses you can buy the drill pattern is not symmetric, meaning the boss will go on one way and one way only when you have drilled the holes. So make sure the boss doesn't shift while and after drilling. So to make sure the boss doesn't shift, I insert the 4 rivets. And now it's over to the anvil for peening the rivets. To protect the wood, I underlay the rivet with a washer, and then I just start peening the rivet over. And since doing this cold takes a bit of patience, I've sped this part up a bit. But what you can witness in the video is that I'm walking around the rivet with my hammer and placing blows from different directions to give the rivet a nice head shape and to make sure it flows evenly. Then basically do this for all 4 rivets, but I'll spare you this part. However, it's quite hard riveting stuff if you don't have an anvil, So you can also use nails to attach the boss and bend them over on the back side. Once the boss is riveted on, I align my strap band on the back side of the shield. Now I'm sorry to say I don't have any video of the process of me making this strap band, but it's a fairly easy process and I've seen a lot of ways how strap bands can be made. I've even seen people just strapping on a raw piece of board basically on the back side of their shield. Works well. These are a bit more sophisticated, take a bit more practice and a bit more work to make. And I'm thinking about getting them onto my shop, but I'm not sure if there is a market for that. Once I've pre-drilled the holes and inserted my nails, I just bend over the tip of the nails to sink them into the backside of the strap band. And then it's over to the anvil again to bend over the tip a little bit past 90 degrees and then just hammering it flush with the backside of the strap band.
So there you have it, two big 90 centimeter round shields. Both of them are for sale. I mean, I already got one 1 meter round shield, and I'm really not sure what to do with two more. Bet I could do dual wield round shield fighting. What about that? Yeah, no, but both of these are for sale. Link to my shop down in the video description, where you can find both of these. I'm not really sure where I'll put them price-wise yet, but you'll see it on my website anyways. So, hope you enjoyed. See you guys next time. Cheers and bye-bye.